The EEG as a language. A theory of how the brain's electrical text can be read as words. Part 1. The claim. This theory makes a single, hard claim, and then defends it from every side. The electrical activity of the brain, recorded as an EEG, is not merely a signal that correlates with thought. It is a language. And because it is a language, it can be translated into words directly, deterministically, by a fixed dictionary, in the same way any language can be carried into any other. The rest of this text is the argument for why that claim, which sounds impossible, may in fact be the most natural thing in the world. Recall from the companion theory what a language actually is. A language is not a store of finished meanings. It is a grown structure of prediction and combination, a finite engine running over a finite set of parts to produce an unbounded range of outputs. A language is transparent to its user. The meaning seems to arrive already finished, and the machinery that produced it hides itself. To call the EEG a language is to claim it has this same deep shape, and that its transparency has simply never been cleaned. The first premise is the largest, and everything rests on it. To the brain, everything is text. Not text in the narrow sense of letters on a page, but text in the deep sense of a stream of discrete symbols carrying information forward in time. The brain does not touch the world directly. It never feels sunlight, only the firing of cells that respond to sunlight. It never hears a voice, only a train of electrical pulses that stand in for the voice. Everything the brain knows arrives as code, and code is text. Consider what a neuron does. It gathers inputs, and when they cross a threshold it fires or it does not. Fire or not. 1 or 0. The whole storm of human experience, every color, every grief, every remembered face, is carried on this single binary act repeated across billions of cells in patterns across time. The brain is, in the most literal sense, a machine that writes and reads sequences of discrete symbols. It is a supercomputer whose only alphabet is the spike, and whose only operation is the arrangement of spikes in time. If the brain's native medium is a stream of discrete symbols unfolding in time, then the brain's native medium already meets the formal definition of text. And if experience is text to the brain, then the EEG, which records that text as it flows, is not a translation of thought into signal. It is thought, in its own script, caught in the act. The EEG is the brain reading its own page over your shoulder. We have simply never known how to read the handwriting. Here is the shape of the method, stated plainly before it is justified. First, from a very large body of writing, say 60,000 articles, build a list of every word ranked by how often it appears, from the most frequent word down to the least. Second, from a very large body of recorded brain activity, say 3 million EEG samples, build a list of every distinct EEG pattern ranked by how often it appears, from the most frequent down to the least. Third, place the two lists side by side in a file of 2 columns. That file is a dictionary. In that dictionary, the most frequent EEG pattern sits beside the most frequent word. The second most frequent EEG pattern sits beside the second most frequent word. And so in strict descending order all the way down. The claim is that this alignment is not arbitrary bookkeeping but a genuine translation table, and that an EEG pattern, once looked up in it, yields the word it means. This is the whole machine. Its simplicity is not a weakness of the theory. It is the theory's boldest wager. Part 2, Why frequency is the bridge. Everything turns on a single, almost eerie regularity in how symbols are used. In any large body of human language, the words do not appear with equal frequency, nor with random frequency. They fall into a precise and repeating pattern. The most common word appears about twice as often as the second, 3 times as often as the third, and so on down the ranks. The frequency of a word is inversely proportional to its rank. This is a law, stable across languages, authors, centuries, and topics. This regularity is not a quirk of English, or of writing. It appears wherever symbols are used to carry meaning under pressure to be efficient. It governs the words of every studied human language. It governs the flow of information through countless natural and made systems. It seems to be a signature of any system that must pack meaning into a stream of symbols while spending as little effort as possible. It is what the mathematics of communication looks like when it is doing its job. Now ask the decisive question. If the brain is a system that packs meaning into a stream of symbols under pressure to be efficient, why would its symbols not obey the same law? The brain is the most relentless economizer in nature. It runs on a trickle of power and never wastes a spike it can save. Every reason the words of a book fall into that frequency pattern applies with equal or greater force to the patterns of the brain. The brain has every incentive to be Zipfian and no incentive to be otherwise. So the bridge between the two lists is this shared law. Both the book and the brain are compression systems built by the same pressures, and both, being efficient, distribute their symbols in the same lawful shape. The word list has a most frequent element, a second, a third, each in fixed proportion. The EEG list has a most frequent element, a second, a third, in the same fixed proportion. The two lists are not two different things. They are two castings of one mold, and that is why they can be laid against each other. Consider why the ranking survives translation, where the raw values do not. The absolute count of a word in 60,000 articles and the absolute count of an EEG pattern in 3 million samples are incomparable numbers, measured in different units on different scales. But rank is unitless. Rank asks only, of all the symbols in this system, where does this one stand? First or fifth or 5,000th? And rank, being pure position, can be compared across any two systems that share the same distribution, even when nothing else about them can. This is the quiet genius of using frequency rather than form. We do not need to know what an EEG pattern looks like, or why it has the shape it has, or how it relates physically to a word. We need only its position in the ordered list of all patterns. Position is portable. Position is what one language and another have in common when they have nothing else in common. And two systems built by the same law will hold their meanings at the same positions, so that position alone becomes a key that unlocks one system with the other. There is a deep reason this should be so, beyond mere shared statistics. Frequency is not random. A word is common because the thing it points to is common in the life and thought of the people who use it. The most frequent words are the connective tissue of thought itself, the small constant words of relation and presence. Frequency is a fossil of importance. What is used most is what matters most often. The rank of a symbol is a measure of how central its meaning is to the mind that produces it. And here the two systems meet not just in statistics, but in substance. If the most frequent word is the most central meaning in the world of the writer, and the most frequent EEG pattern is the most central state in the world of the brain, then they are pointing at the same thing from two directions. Both are answering the question, what does this mind dwell on most? The ranking of words and the ranking of brain states are two records of a single underlying reality, which is what a mind spends its time meaning. This is why the correspondence can be more than coincidence. The word "the" is frequent not by accident, but because relation, connection, and definiteness are constant needs of a thinking creature. Whatever brain pattern is most frequent for a parallel reason. It too serves a constant need of the thinking creature. The two most frequent items are yoked to the same constancy. Slide down the ranks and the yoking holds, each word and each pattern anchored together to the same tier of how often the mind needs this. Part 3. Why the brain can be a book. There is an objection that must be met head-on. A book and a brain seem to be utterly different kinds of thing. One is dead ink. The other is living electricity. How can a list drawn from books have anything to say about the traffic of a living mind? The answer reverses the direction of the surprise. The book is not the foreign thing that must be forced to match the brain. The book came out of the brain. Every book that has ever existed is a brain's contents spilled onto a page. Follow the origin of a book backward. The words in the 60,000 articles were not found in nature. They were produced, one after another, by human brains choosing them, and the choosing left its statistical fingerprint on the result. The frequency pattern of the words in those articles is not a fact about paper. It is a fact about the minds that wrote them, transferred onto paper. When we build a frequency list from books, we are not studying books. We are studying brains at one remove through the residue they left. So the brain can be like a book for the simplest possible reason. The book is a copy of the brain. The frequency structure of written language is a photograph of the frequency structure of thought, taken through the lens of the writing hand. To compare an EEG frequency list to a word frequency list is therefore to compare the brain to a photograph of the brain. Of course they align. They are the same original, captured twice, once in electricity and once in ink. This dissolves the strangeness entirely. We are not claiming that the wet biology of neurons secretly resembles the dry pages of a book. We are claiming something weaker, and therefore stronger. That both the book and the EEG are outputs of the same source, and that outputs of one source carry that source's signature. The signature is the frequency law. A book carries it because a brain wrote the book. An EEG carries it because a brain is the EEG. The signature is what lets one be read through the other. Think of it as two recordings of one voice. One recording was made in the medium of written words, slowly, deliberately, over years, by countless hands. The other was made in the medium of electrical potential, instantly, involuntarily, by the living tissue itself. The recordings sound nothing alike. One is silent ink and the other is invisible current. But if you rank the elements of each by frequency, the two ranked lists are two transcripts of the same speaker, and a phrase can be found in one by its position in the other. This is what it means to say the brain generates text within itself. The brain does not merely process incoming text and emit outgoing text. Between input and output, in the dark, it is running a continuous internal stream of symbolic activity, a private text that never reaches paper or speech, the raw draft of thought before any of it is chosen for the world. The EEG is a window onto that private draft. It is the brain's inner monologue in the brain's own alphabet, and it obeys the same laws as the monologue that reaches the page. Part 4. Why EEG says more than reading a person. A subtle point sharpens the theory. Not all windows onto the mind show the same depth. When you read what a person has written, you see only what they chose to release. Writing is filtered, edited, arranged for an audience, stripped of everything the writer decided to withhold. The written text is the mind's public face, composed and cautious. It tells you what the person wanted said, which is a thin slice of what the person actually held. Speech goes deeper than writing, and this is a clue to the whole theory. Speech is faster than the editor can work. It slips, it reveals, it carries tone and hesitation and the shape of feeling underneath the words. We say that speech is a more advanced and more revealing way to communicate than reading precisely because it leaks. It spills more of the person than any composed page, because it is closer to the source, produced before the full machinery of concealment can shape it. Now push the logic one step further, to its end. If speech reveals more than writing because it is closer to the unedited source, then what lies closer still? The EEG. The EEG is upstream of speech itself. It is the activity from which speech is later selected, the full draft before any of it is spoken, including everything that will never be spoken. Reading a person's writing shows their public mind. Hearing their speech shows their spilling mind. Reading their EEG shows their whole mind, before selection, before concealment, before choice. This is why the EEG is not a lesser signal to be pitied for its noise, but a richer text to be prized for its fullness. It contains more than any word the person will ever say, because it contains all the words they consider and reject, all the meanings they form and never voice. If speech spills more than reading, EEG spills more than speech, and by the same principle. It is one layer closer to the origin. The theory does not merely tolerate the EEG. It ranks the EEG as the deepest text a person emits. And here the frequency method gains its power. Because the EEG is the fullest text, its frequency structure is the truest photograph of the mind's priorities, unfiltered by the editing that shapes written and even spoken language. If anything, the EEG should obey the frequency law more purely than a book, because a book is a book only after the writer's choices have distorted the raw distribution. The EEG is the distribution before distortion. It is the cleanest copy of the mold from which the word list was also cast. Part 5. The Dictionary and the Act of Translation. Return now to the 2-column file and see it for what it has become. It is not a table of guesses. It is a lexicon, a dictionary in the strict sense, mapping each element of one language to its counterpart in another. On the left, an EEG pattern. On the right, a word. Between them, the equals sign of translation. To translate a stretch of brain activity, you take each pattern, find its row, and read across. The output is a string of words. The brain has been read. This is exactly how the companion theory said a dictionary makes someone speak. A dictionary is a list of parts. On its own, it is inert. It cannot walk. What makes it live is an engine of combination that takes the parts and arranges them into meaning. The EEG dictionary supplies the parts, the mapping from pattern to word. And the engine that arranges them is the sequence of the EEG itself, the order in which the brain fires its patterns, which becomes the order in which the words are laid down. So the translation is not merely a lookup of isolated words. The brain fires its patterns in sequence, and that sequence is a sentence in the brain's language. Run each pattern through the dictionary and the sequence of patterns becomes a sequence of words, a sentence in ours. The grammar of the output is inherited from the order of the input. We do not need to supply the engine of combination. The brain is already running it. We supply only the parts list, and the brain's own sequencing does the rest. This is why the translation can be deterministic, which is the property that separates a language from a mood ring. A mood ring maps a state to a color by a loose and shifting association. A language maps a symbol to a meaning by a fixed rule that anyone can apply and everyone will apply the same way. The EEG dictionary is a fixed rule. The same pattern always yields the same word. There is no interpretation, no reading of the tea leaves, no expert intuition required. There is only lookup, which a machine can do without understanding, exactly as a language demands. Determinism is the seal of a true language. In a real language, the word does not mean one thing for me and another for you. If it did, we could not communicate. Meaning must be stable across users and occasions, or it is not meaning at all. The EEG dictionary claims this same stability. The pattern ranked first means the word ranked first, always, for everyone, forever, because both are anchored to the same rank by the same law. A translation that holds no matter who performs it is the mark that a genuine language lies underneath. And this is why the theory insists the translation can be accurate, not approximate. Accuracy is not a hope we bring to the method from outside. It is a consequence of the method being a language at all. Languages are accurate by nature. That is what makes them languages, rather than clouds of suggestion. If the EEG truly is a language, and the dictionary truly captures its rank structure, then accuracy is not something to be achieved by effort. It is already contained in the claim, the way a valid proof contains its conclusion. Part 6. What makes something a language? To defend all this, we must be precise about what makes something a language, and then show, one property at a time, that the EEG has each one. A language needs symbols that are discrete and repeatable. It needs those symbols to carry stable meanings. It needs the meanings to combine by order into larger meanings. It needs the whole system to be shared and readable, so that what one part encodes another part can decode. If the EEG has all of these, then the EEG is a language, not by metaphor but by definition. First, discrete and repeatable symbols. The EEG is not a formless smear of electricity. It resolves into recurring patterns, states that appear again and again, distinct enough to be told apart and stable enough to be counted. This is precisely what lets us build a frequency list in the first place. You cannot rank the frequency of something that never repeats. The very existence of an EEG frequency distribution proves the EEG has discrete, countable, repeatable symbols. The alphabet exists, or the list could not be made. Second, stable meanings for the symbols. This is what the frequency correspondence supplies. Each EEG pattern is assigned a meaning by its rank, and that assignment does not drift, because rank does not drift. The most frequent pattern stays the most frequent, tied to the most frequent word. The meaning is fixed by the pattern's place in the whole system, and place is the most stable property a symbol can have. The dictionary is exactly the record of these stable meanings, one per row. Third, combination by order. The EEG unfolds in time, one pattern after another, and time imposes order, and order is the raw material of grammar. The sequence in which the brain fires its symbols is not random noise laid between the meaningful bits. It is itself the meaningful structure, the arrangement that turns a bag of words into a sentence. The brain's temporal order becomes the sentence's word order. Combination is not something we add. It is already present in the flow of the signal through time. Fourth, shared and readable. Here the frequency law does the work that a shared culture does for spoken language. Two English speakers understand each other because they inherited the same mapping of sounds to meanings. The EEG and the word list share their mapping because they inherited the same frequency law from the same source, the brain. The code is shared not because two people agreed on it but because one process, thought, generated both sides of it. Shared origin is a deeper guarantee of readability than mere agreement. So the EEG satisfies every criterion. It has an alphabet of repeatable patterns. It has stable meanings fixed by rank. It has grammar supplied by temporal order. It has a shared code guaranteed by common origin. There is nothing left that a language has and the EEG lacks. To go on calling the EEG a mere signal after this is to refuse a definition one has already accepted everywhere else. By the same test we use to call English a language, the EEG is a language too. Notice that this does not require the EEG to resemble English in any surface way. Languages need not resemble one another to be intertranslatable. English and a language written in an entirely different script share no surface features, yet each word of one has its counterpart in the other. The EEG is such a foreign language, written in the script of electrical potential rather than ink, and the dictionary is the bilingual lexicon between them. Difference of medium is no barrier to translation, only difference of structure, and the structure is the same. Part 7. the brain as a text-generating machine. Step back to the widest view, where the theory rests on its foundation. The brain is a machine that never stops generating text. Awake or asleep, attending or idle, it is always producing its internal stream of symbolic activity, the ceaseless inner writing that is the substance of being a mind. There is no moment when the brain falls silent, no gap in the text. The EEG confirms this. The signal is always there, always structured, always flowing. The brain is a pen that cannot be lifted from the page. This ceaselessness is itself evidence. A language is a system in constant use. A dead language is one no longer generated. The brain's text is the most alive language there is, produced without pause for as long as the mind exists. If we were looking for the most active language on Earth, we would find it here, running continuously in every waking and sleeping skull, generating more text per second than all the writers in history combined, and never once repeating the world exactly. When everything the brain handles is text and the EEG is the brain's own text, the two facts fuse into the theory's core identity. The EEG is text, and specifically it is the brain's text, the brain's native language, the tongue it speaks to itself before it speaks to anyone else. It is the language beneath all the others, the one from which spoken and written language are later derived. English is a costume the brain's text puts on to go out in public. The EEG is the brain undressed. This is why translating the EEG is not like inventing a new code from nothing. It is like discovering that a document we thought was scribble is actually written in a known language whose key we have just found. The document was always meaningful. It was always saying something. We simply lacked the dictionary. The frequency method is the key that was hiding in plain sight, in the one property the brain's text shares with every book: the lawful distribution of its symbols. And it explains why the dictionary can be built without ever understanding a single EEG pattern in isolation. We never have to ask what one pattern means on its own, just as we never have to ask what the sound, the, means as a raw noise. Meaning here is positional, relational, a matter of where each symbol stands in the whole. Build the whole list, align it with the other whole list, and meaning falls out of the alignment. The parts have no meaning apart from their place, and place is exactly what the method supplies. Here the theory answers why brute correspondence can yield sense rather than gibberish. It would be gibberish if the two lists were unrelated, if the ranks of one had nothing to do with the ranks of the other. But we have shown they are not unrelated. They are two records of one source, shaped by one law, anchored to one underlying reality of what the mind means most. Alignment of two records of the same thing is not a shot in the dark. It is the recovery of a correspondence that was always there. Part 8, Objections and Answers. The theory is strongest when it meets its objections, so let us raise them without mercy. The first objection. Matching two frequency lists by rank is a mechanical trick that could align any two lists at all, meaningful or not. Rank matching a grocery receipt to a phone book would also produce a two-column file. What makes the EEG file different from that absurdity? The answer is the shared source. The receipt and the phone book have no common origin, so their alignment encodes nothing. The EEG and the word list have a common origin, the brain, so their alignment encodes that source. This is the pivot on which the whole theory turns, and it deserves to be stated as sharply as possible. Frequency alignment recovers meaning if, and only if, the two systems being aligned were shaped by the same underlying process. When they were, the alignment is a translation. When they were not, it is a coincidence. The labor of this theory has been to establish that the EEG and human writing were shaped by the same underlying process, namely, the human brain meaning things. Granted that, the alignment is not a trick. It is a measurement. The second objection. The frequency law is only approximate, and real word frequencies wobble around the ideal. If the law is imperfect, the alignment must be imperfect too, and imperfect alignment means mistranslation. This is true, and the theory should embrace rather than deny it. No language is perfect. Every translation carries error at its edges. That the EEG dictionary would err on rare, low-rank patterns, where the frequency law is noisiest, does not refute the theory. It places the EEG exactly where every real language lives. Precise at the common core, fuzzy at the rare margins. In fact, this imperfection is a point in the theory's favor. A method that claimed flawless correspondence would be suspicious, too clean to be real. The frequency law's known behavior, tight at the top ranks and loose at the bottom, predicts precisely the error profile a real language shows. The common words, the ones that carry most of any message, translate cleanly, and only the rare words blur. The theory does not merely survive the imperfection. It predicts the shape of the imperfection, which is what a real theory does. The third objection. Brains differ from person to person, so one dictionary cannot fit all. My most frequent pattern may not be yours. The answer draws again on the nature of frequency. The top-ranked meanings are the universal ones, the constant needs shared by every human mind. Presence, relation, self, negation, the connective tissue of all thought. These sit at the same ranks in everyone, because they answer the same constant pressures in everyone. The dictionary is most reliable exactly where minds are most alike, and minds are most alike at the top of the list, which is where most of the message lives. The fourth objection. Correlation is not translation, and even a perfect statistical match between two lists shows only that they share a shape, not that one means the other. This is the deepest objection, and it deserves the fullest answer. Shared shape becomes shared meaning precisely when the shape is the meaning, and in a frequency-ranked language the shape is the meaning. A word's rank is a measure of its centrality is its role, and its role is what it means. When two systems share the rank structure, they share the thing that rank structure encodes, which is meaning itself. The fifth objection. How do we ever check that the translation is right, if we cannot independently read the EEG? The answer is that we can check, because the person whose EEG we translate can speak. Record the EEG while a person thinks a known word, translate it by the dictionary, and see whether the output matches the word. Do this across many words and many people, and the accuracy of the dictionary becomes a measurable quantity, not a matter of faith. The theory is not only bold. It is testable, which is the final requirement of a serious claim. And notice what the test would reveal if the theory is right. That the words a person is thinking come out of the dictionary at rates far above chance, climbing higher for the common words and settling lower for the rare ones, exactly as the frequency law predicts. That signature, high accuracy, at the top ranks decaying gracefully down the list, is what would distinguish a true language from a lucky coincidence. The theory stakes itself on that signature appearing, and offers the method by which anyone can look for it. Part 9. The nature of meaning in this system. We should be honest about what kind of meaning this method recovers, for it is a particular kind, and its particularity is illuminating. The dictionary does not explain why a pattern means its word, in the sense of tracing a mechanism from voltage to concept. It asserts the mapping, and lets the mapping do its work. This is not a weakness. It is how all dictionaries work. No dictionary of English explains why a tree means a tree. It simply records that it does, and the recording is enough to translate. Meaning in a language is not a property a symbol carries inside itself. It is a property the symbol has by virtue of its place in the whole system, its relations to every other symbol, its position in the web. The companion theory called vocabulary a web, not a list, and said fluency was the moment the list became a web. The EEG dictionary begins as a list, but the frequency ranking is already the first thread of the web, the placing of each symbol relative to all the others. Meaning enters with the ranking. This is why the method can work without any theory of how the brain physically encodes concepts. We do not need to crack the neural code in the reductive sense, to trace the wiring from spike to idea. We need only the relational structure, the ranking, the web of positions. Meaning lives in the relations, and the relations are exactly what the frequency list captures. The physical substrate can remain a mystery, while the language it carries is read fluently, just as one can read English without knowing a thing about the physics of ink. There is a liberating consequence here. The hard problem of tracing meaning down into the machinery of neurons, which has resisted every assault, is simply bypassed. We do not go under the language to find its meaning in the wiring. We stay at the level of the language, where meaning actually lives, and read it there. The EEG is treated not as a biological signal to be decoded from beneath, but as a text to be read from within, on its own terms, in its own tongue. This is the same move that makes any translation possible. When you translate a foreign sentence, you do not first reduce it to the neural firings of the person who spoke it. You work at the level of the language, matching word to word and structure to structure. The EEG theory says, treat the brain's text the same way. Do not reduce it. Translate it. Meet it at the level where it is already language, and the barrier that seemed insurmountable at the level of biology dissolves at the level of meaning. Part 10, the broader picture. Widen the lens once more and see what kind of claim this really is about the mind. It says the mind is not hidden behind an unbreakable wall of private biology. It says the wall was never opaque, only unread, and that the mind writes itself out continuously in a language we can now transcribe. The privacy of thought, which has felt absolute for all of human history, is on this theory a temporary condition, lasting only as long as we lacked the dictionary. Thought is public in principle. It was only ever private in practice. This connects the EEG theory to the oldest human advance described in the companion text, the crossing from a world of isolated minds to a world of minds joined by speech. Language, that theory said, turned islands into bridges by letting the contents of one mind travel into another. The EEG dictionary is the next span of that same bridge. It lets the contents of a mind travel out without even the labor of speaking, straight from the electrical draft into readable words. It is the extension of language, back to its own source. Recall that the deepest human advance was not that individuals grew smarter, but that language let intelligence pool and accumulate across minds and generations. If the EEG can be read as language, the pool widens again. The unspoken, the unwritten, the draft thoughts that used to die inside single skulls could now join the common store. Everything a person considers and never says, the vast dark matter of human thought, becomes in principle shareable. The accumulation that made us human would gain a new and enormous tributary. And recall the theme of transparency. A native language is transparent. The user looks straight through the words to the meaning, and never sees the machinery. To its owner, the EEG is the most transparent language of all, so transparent it is invisible. No one experiences their own brainwaves, they experience only the thoughts those waves carry. The EEG dictionary makes that invisible transparency visible to others. It cleans the glass from the outside, so that a second person can look through your brain's text to your meaning, as you always have from within. This is why the theory feels at once impossible and inevitable. Impossible, because we are used to thought being sealed, and the idea of reading it directly violates that lifelong assumption. Inevitable, because once you accept that thought is text, that text obeys the frequency law, and that the same law governs the books thought produces, the translation follows with the force of arithmetic. The impossibility is a feeling. The inevitability is an argument. Theories are judged by their arguments. Let us also be clear about the ambition and its limits together, for honesty is part of a theory's strength. The method, at its simplest, recovers words, not the full living texture of experience. It gives the lexicon and leans on the brain's own sequencing for the grammar. It may capture the common core of thought far better than its rare and idiosyncratic edges. But a method that reliably rendered the common core of a person's unspoken thought into words would already be among the most consequential instruments ever built, whatever its edges. Consider what such an instrument would mean for those who cannot speak. There are minds locked inside bodies that no longer answer them, thinking fully and continuously, generating their inner text with every one of the properties this theory describes, yet unable to release a word of it. For them, the EEG dictionary is not a philosophical curiosity. It is a voice. It is the bridge rebuilt for someone whose usual bridge has fallen. The theory's most abstract claim that the EEG is a language becomes for them the most concrete gift imaginable. Part 11, Why it must be a language and not merely a signal. We should draw the sharp line between a signal and a language, because the whole theory lives on the far side of it. A signal correlates. A language means. A thermometer's reading correlates with heat, but does not mean heat in any linguistic sense. There is no grammar of thermometer readings, no combination, no sentences. Most attempts to read the brain have treated the EEG as a signal, hunting for correlations between a wave and a state. This theory refuses that framing. It treats the EEG as a language, and the difference is everything. The reason the EEG must be a language, and not merely a signal, is combination. A signal has no syntax. Each reading stands alone. But the EEG's patterns follow one another in ordered sequences that build larger meanings from smaller ones, exactly as words build sentences. Where there is combination, there is grammar, and where there is grammar, there is language, not mere signal. The brain does not emit isolated readings. It emits ordered streams that compose. Composition is the fingerprint of language, and the EEG has it. Furthermore, a signal is dumb about frequency. There is no reason a thermometer's common readings should align with anything. But the EEG's frequencies align with the frequencies of words, and that alignment is meaningful only if both are languages drawing on a shared code. A signal would show no such alignment, or only an accidental one with no source behind it. The presence of a lawful, source-backed frequency correspondence is itself proof that we are dealing with a language and not a signal, for only languages carry that correspondence. So the choice of framing is not a matter of taste but of fact, and the facts point one way. The EEG has repeatable symbols, stable positional meanings, combinatorial grammar, a shared code, and a lawful frequency structure that matches human writing. Every one of these is a property of language, and none is a property of a mere signal. To insist on calling it a signal is to ignore 5 properties in order to preserve one habit. The theory simply follows the properties to their conclusion. This is a language, and it can be read as one. Part 12, the method restated and sealed. Let us gather the whole argument into a single chain, so its links can be seen at once. The brain handles everything as text. The EEG is the brain's own text. Text produced by an efficient mind obeys the frequency law. Human writing is text produced by the same mind and obeys the same law. 2 texts from one source, ranked by frequency, align rank to rank. That alignment is a dictionary. A dictionary makes translation deterministic and accurate. Therefore, the EEG can be translated into words, deterministically and accurately, by the dictionary. Each link holds and the chain reaches its end. The genius of the two-column file is that it hides all this machinery inside an object a child could use. To translate, you need no theory, no understanding, no skill. You need only to look up a pattern and read across. The entire depth of the argument, the shared source, the frequency law, the nature of meaning as position, is compressed into a table so simple it looks like nothing. This is exactly what a mature language looks like. Infinite depth beneath a surface, anyone can operate. The dictionary earns its simplicity honestly. And the method scales with its inputs, which is the mark of something real rather than a lucky fit. 60,000 articles give a good word list. 600,000 would give a better one, its ranks more stable, its law more cleanly expressed. 3 million EEG samples give a good pattern list. 30 million would sharpen it further. As both corpora grow, both frequency distributions settle toward their true shape, and the alignment between them tight. The theory predicts that more data makes the translation better, smoothly, without limit. That is how a true measurement behaves. Nor is the method bound to one language of output. The frequency law governs every human language, so a word list could be built in any of them, and the same EEG pattern list aligned against each. The brain's text is prior to any spoken tongue. It can be rendered into whichever one we choose. This is further evidence that the EEG is the deep language beneath the others, the common source that each spoken language draws from. It can be poured into any of them, because it is the well they were all drawn from. We can now say precisely what the EEG is, in a single formulation the whole theory has been building toward. The EEG is the human mind's native language, written continuously in the script of electrical potential, obeying the same statistical law as every language the mind has ever externalized, and therefore translatable into any of them by a fixed dictionary built from shared frequency. It is not a shadow of thought. It is thought, in the original, before translation into speech or writing ever occurs. Part 13, What a Language Is, answered through the EEG. The companion theory asked what a language is and answered. A grown structure of prediction and combination, a finite engine over finite parts producing without limit, transparent to its user, accumulating across minds. Test the EEG against every clause. It is grown, developing with the brain from infancy. It combines, sequencing its patterns into compound meanings. It is finite in parts and unbounded in output, since the brain never fires the exact same sequence twice. It is transparent, invisible to its owner who sees only meaning. It accumulates, and could accumulate further once read. The EEG answers the definition point for point. So the two theories meet and complete each other. The first told us what a language is, in general, abstractly. The second shows that the most fundamental language of all was inside us the whole time, underneath the ones we learned, generating the text from which every book and every spoken word was later drawn. To ask what a language is, and to ask what the EEG is turn out to be the same question, answered from two ends. Language is what the mind does, and the EEG is the mind doing it, caught in the act, in its first and truest tongue. And the humblest object in this whole edifice, the two-column CSV file, turns out to be the heir of the oldest human invention. It is a dictionary, and dictionaries are how one language becomes readable through another, how the contents of one mind reach another mind. This particular dictionary reaches further than any before it, back past speech, past writing, to the electrical draft of thought itself. It is the same bridge our ancestors first built out of sound, extended at last to its own foundation, the silent text the brain writes to itself. If the theory is right, then privacy of thought was never a law of nature but a gap in our tools, and the gap is closing. If it is wrong in a way that can be measured, tested against the words a person thinks and the words the dictionary returns, and its error will show the shape the frequency law predicts. Either way, it is a real theory, standing on real premises, exposed to real refutation. It asks only to be tested by the one experiment it plainly describes. Build the two lists, align them, and see whether the brain speaks. We began with an impossible-sounding claim and end with a chain of ordinary steps that leads straight to it. Everything is text to the brain. The EEG is that text. Text obeys the frequency law. Books are text from the same source. Two texts from one source align by frequency into a dictionary. And a dictionary makes a language readable. There is no magic in any single step. The wonder is only in where the ordinary steps arrive. They arrive at a mind made legible to another mind through its own electricity. That is what the EEG can be as a language. The last and deepest tongue, and now perhaps a readable one.